The biggest things that I've seen disrupt somebody's retirement would be the impulse people. So some people are a little bit more impulse buyers than others. And so, for example, they had a client that had a couple $1 million of assets, and you initially start planning for them, and then all of a sudden they're like, I went out and bought $1 million house on a whim. Well, that's half of your retirement balance that you were counting on for being able to utilize. Well, now you essentially cut your budget right in half. So a lot of times it's the impulse people that throw a little complication into the mix. So sometimes you just have to be aware of, like, it would be wise to, anytime that you have a large purchase or a big idea. So whether it's healthcare or a family need or for fun, if it's a big purchase item, you might want to talk or communicate that with, like, whoever you're working with, whether it's your accountant or your financial advisor. You just want to have those conversations before you just go out and do it.
Welcome to the Retire and Renew podcast, the podcast where we talk about the real side of retirement, not just the money, but the mindset, identity, relationships, and purpose that shape your next chapter. I'm your host, Margaret Zyk, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Reif, a financial advisor with years of experience helping people to prepare for retirement from the financial side of the equation. In today's conversation, we're also going to explore not only what people need to think financially, but also what are some of the emotional realities that show up once retirement becomes real. Jeremy, I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So let's dive right into the questions. So you could tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to financial advising.
Sure. First of all, I'm married and have three boys, so they're all school age, elementary school and up to middle school. So busy with my time, but anything to help people find their way for retirement. So glad I can help with this. But how I got into the industry, it comes back to, I was in high school, and I was playing the stock market game. And what happened is, this was the late 90s, and the markets were running up with all the .com stuff. And I was playing with fake money. And my teacher at the time was like, well, if you really are confident with what you're doing, why don't you actually try to invest? And so I
Uh-huh.
took it upon myself. I met with my parents' advisor at the time and said, this is what I'd like to do. And I was biking to work. I worked at Wendy's, so I knew how hard, that I didn't want to be in the fast food industry. And so I took my hard earned money and I invested it. And initially, I thought I was a rocket scientist. I thought it was brilliant. And then what happened is 2001, the .com bubble. It's like, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. And so
Uh-huh.
it started off with just, dabbling with my own money. And then, being from the Midwest, maybe it's my parents raised me really well, or maybe it's just the Midwest mentality. I always loved helping people. And from sports to academics, people always looked up to me and they always came to me asking questions. And so from little on, I always liked helping people. And so those two really went hand in hand after I decided this is the career path that I wanted to follow. Is I love helping people. So it's really kind of where it started. And I've been doing it since 2004. So I've been doing it for over 20 years, not to date myself.
So that spark, that curiosity got you started, and then you took it from there and continued to learn.
Absolutely. Still
So
learning, still taking classes, still, you can never improve enough, right?
yeah, absolutely. And the market volatility is one that's going to also keep you on your toes, right?
Absolutely.
So after working with so many clients for so many years, like what do you think are some of the common mistakes or blind spots that you think people have, not only investing but also approaching retirement?
One of the biggest things, everybody can go to a free website nowadays or ask ChatGPT or, like some of this artificial intelligence that we have out there, and answer the basic questions. But usually it's the people that have done a great job saving. They're like, no problem. I'll be able to make retirement. I can retire anytime I want. usually the biggest problem that they have is they discount what taxes are going to cost during retirement. Or the other one would be health. How much is health insurance going to cost, later on down the road? Because inevitably,
Mm-hmm.
life and death, right? People are going to pass away and they just don't realize, the costs associated with the healthcare industry,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes sneaks up on people. So,
Yeah. Those are two really good points. For someone in their 50s and early 60s, what are a few practical things they should be thinking about now or to better prepare for retirement?
so for the people that are not yet retired, to hone in on two different things is if they haven't thought about it, how are they going to afford health care, health insurance from bridging that gap from if they retire at 60 or 55 until age 65 when Medicare kicks in? Does their company offer a plan or is it just Cobra? Some companies still have great health insurance and they'll say you can retire early and keep our health insurance until 65, but those cases are becoming far and few between. So if you go to the open healthcare market, how are you going to afford that? And if you want that subsidy to have that lower healthcare cost,
Huh?
like income is the thing that people say, well, if I draw from my retirement accounts, then that counts as income. And so is there a way to get around that? And so using health savings accounts and building up balances and utilizing cash or utilizing Roths would be one of those key components for, again, the tax thing in it coupling with the health insurance and how the affordability.
So really planning for that expense in a way that's fiscally responsible to be able to bring it out of your accounts if need be.
Correct. And so in some cases, meeting with a couple last night, we ended up before they retired, they took a big distribution from their 401k. So they
Huh?
had it in cash. They paid for taxes in last year's tax bracket. And so that way they have this money freed up so it doesn't count as income for the next several years. So they qualify for a higher subsidy for their health insurance.
Interesting. Okay.
A
Got
loophole,
it.
right?
Yeah. That's a great point. So when people finally realize, retirement's getting closer, what do you think tends to surprise people the most?
That they have a spouse? No, just kidding. you know, it, a lot of times they imagine this is what I want to do in retirement, but they forget to ask what their spouse wants to do. And sometimes, like if you're going to work and you got kids and you're raising them, like you're not really communicating and saying, well, I want to, because I live in the Midwest and we're having a huge snowfall this weekend. They say, well, I want to get away. I want to move down to Florida. I'm gonna golf. I'm gonna go fishing or whatever it is that they enjoy as a hobby. And they say, I'm gonna get away for 6 months of the year, and their spouse be like, what about Christmas? What about Thanksgiving? What about Easter? What about birthdays for the grandkids? Because grandkids are the most important thing.
Right.
Different phases of life, and so they forget to ask their spouse. And so what ends up happening is at first they're gun ho, they move away and they're gone for 6, 7, 8 months of the year. And then all of a
Um,
sudden they're back to 6 months and then they're back 4 months. And then, like all of a sudden they're like, we sold our place in Florida and we moved back because there's other things in life that are just more important. The emotional ties that they forget to ask their spouses about, so what looks good on paper maybe isn't good, family wise. You know what I mean?
Got it. So, from your perspective, in addition to the spouse and having those conversations of like, hey, what does retirement look like to me, you, and let's say us and our family? What other kinds of things alongside of that planning conversations do you think are important for people to have just preparing for the emotional side of also like leaving a job that you may have been at for 30 years?
Yeah. So like, what are you going to do with your time? So many people, they rush, 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 say, can I afford to retire? And then all of a sudden they're like, they get to retirement and they're like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. So it was rush for no reason, or they get there and they think this is going to take all their time and they don't end up doing it. Like time management, time is more valuable than the money itself. I mean, obviously you need money to be able to do different things and enjoy life, but it's the time management of things that messes with people and gets people into trouble. So the emotional factor that goes along with the time management, because oftentimes I'll be working with someone and they're like, you know what? I thought I was going to have all this time. And what ends up happening is like, I'm busier than ever. I'm volunteering for this, I'm helping the grandkids with that, and they're pulled in all these different directions that they weren't thinking about. And so, it's again, different phase of life, but if you haven't thought about like what are you going to do to consume your time, and it's different for everybody, so and it plays emotionally different for everybody too.
Do you notice a difference between how men and women experience with transition of retirement?
Um, I think we talked about this before, but uh, a lot of times, like some of the men that I have dealt with, could be doctors or people that are corporate executives, and all of a sudden they're going from this position of high esteem, like where they're highly regarded, and they get to retirement and they go to a retirement community where everybody like, so you are high up and executive, who cares? You know, we're all in the same community now. Everybody is an equal, like, and so sometimes egos or their heads become one of that things that they have a hard time adjusting to. Like, I'm just a regular Joe again, or my spouse doesn't view me the same way as my coworkers did when I was working, and so a lot of times it's usually the males that especially ones that had held, it could be females too, but usually they adjust a little bit better. People that held a big position sometimes have a harder time adjusting. And a lot of times I find that they end up going back and working for different boards or different, like things to fill their time because they want to feel appreciated for, you know, their minds, like and that ego.
Right, and they also can learn that the contribution or their impact doesn't need to stop just because their work stopped.
And
So,
that's where a lot of volunteering comes in, right?
yeah. So, have you seen clients struggle with the shift from earning, like, paycheck to paycheck? Or if you could talk a little bit about the mindset of maybe, like, spending or being able to enjoy their life.
Yeah, that's a great question because that's one of the most difficult things that people do when they, like they're used to having this infinite budget, getting paid every 2 weeks or weekly, whatever their, pay schedule was, to saying, okay, now my portfolio, instead of watching it grow, I have to draw on it. And so one, it's a psychological, change from like seeing and visualizing their portfolio to maybe it grows slower or maybe it stops growing depending on how heavy they have to draw from it. But really, it starts with having a strategy and more specifically, a distribution strategy. Because say, well, if you get paid every 2 weeks, maybe Social Security is one payment per month and maybe a distribution from a portfolio. So you can still get paid two times a month or more if you need to. But,
Uh-huh.
like the amounts, sometimes like if they retire too soon, maybe they have to budget things and, like making sure that they understand, like, hey, if there's times of market volatility, like we need to start planning things out differently than saying, well, I was used to getting a paycheck every 2 weeks to just pre-planning a distribution and planning that out. Like I said, having distribution planning rather than just saying, oh, I'll use the rule of 4%. That's just a generic rule, but what if you need more than that 4%? Is there a way to sustain retirement without jeopardizing retirement?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, what are some of the things that people haven't planned for that sometimes disrupt that planned distribution or, like what they thought it was going to be like?
The biggest things that I've seen disrupt somebody's retirement would be, like the impulse people. So some people are a little bit more impulse buyers than others. And so, for example, they had a client that had a couple $1 million of assets, and you initially start planning for them, and then all of a sudden they're like, I went out and bought a $1 million house on a whim. Well, that's half of your retirement balance that you were counting on for being able to utilize. Well, now you essentially cut your budget right in half. So a lot of times it's the impulse people that throw a little complication into the mix. So sometimes you just have to be aware of, like, it would be wise to, anytime that you have a large purchase or a big idea, so whether it's healthcare or a family need or for fun, if it's a big purchase item, you might want to talk or communicate that with, like, whoever you're working with, whether it's your accountant or your financial advisor. You just want to have those conversations before you just go out and do it.
Got it. So there are people that don't have those conversations and then call you afterwards and go,
Absolutely. And then you're left with, okay, here's what your situation now looks like, unless we decide to do something different, so, unfortunately, sometimes people kind of get over their heads without consulting first.
right? So got it. Make the call first. Call Jeremy
Absolutely.
first. Well, what would be your advice you'd give someone who is financially preparing and hasn't really thought about like how they want to live, or once they no longer work, what's their focus, let's say?
So a lot of times, like, ask the difficult questions before you retire. I mean, that plain and simple. I mean, uh, like, if you were to go and purchase a brand new vehicle, more than likely you're going to go look at it, get in it, touch it, and drive it first before you say, well, I'm just going to throw $100,000 at that brand new whatever. So,
Mhm.
same thing with retirement. Sometimes if you say, well, maybe I'm going to retire sooner than what I had anticipated because of health or whatever's going on, try retirement before you actually buy retirement. And what I mean by that is, if you were saying, well, while I was working, I was accustomed to living on $10,000 a month.
Mhm.
And in retirement, I was thinking I could do it for 6,000 or whatever the number is. And try and pretend like, if you were on vacation, could you get by on 6,000? I mean, you don't actually have to live on 6,000, but you actually keep track. Use an Excel spreadsheet, or use your credit card bill or debit card bill to keep track of what you actually spent for, say, 3 months to 6 months, just to make sure that you could actually do it. So again, just trying to do different things and figuring that out budget-wise before you actually take the plunge, because if you retire at your peak earning and quit, and you wanted to go back to work because you made a mistake, very difficult to get that same level of compensation, same vacation hours than, say, if you only worked one more year. Again, it just, try it before you buy it, I think, is a simplest way to do it if you're a DIY person.
Oh, that's great advice. So, like, if you could tell your high school self what your journey would look like as a financial advisor, what would you tell your high school self?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know if I would change anything, more so than, you know, uh, for things to invest in. I mean, as far as the stock market goes, again, that's a gamble. The only thing I would say is look into real estate. Like, they're not making any more land except for, like Louisiana, when you got all that silt and dirt flowing south. I mean, but realistically, land will continue to go up because they're not making any more of it. And so that would be another area of opportunity that maybe if I would have thought about it before, I would have got into sooner. But other than that, I mean, to invest in yourself, that's another good thing, is never stop learning.
That's great. Can you give a little bit more with that?
I mean, like, in my field, I always have to do continuing education to make sure that I'm giving the best advice possible. But there's different levels of credentials that I can pursue. after going through college and taking all these tests and, and to get licensed for what I was doing, I was kind of studied out. I was kind of tested out and I kind of paused saying, I just want to take a break. I guess that would be the only thing that I wish I would have kept up with. And, so I'm again going back to school and getting education on different things, but, I took a period off in time. I wish I would have done it almost immediately. Again, never stop learning because those things just help you move forward in life, move forward with your professional careers, so again, it's just I took time off, it is what it is, but I see the value in it and I'm continuing to learn. So
Excellent. Well, when I work with clients that are preparing for the emotional side of it, that's one of the things that we work on because, and I think you mentioned it earlier in the interview, like when people get to that freedom, like they kind of go, "What am I going to do with my time?" So that learning is still going to continue, and especially with AI, it's one of those things that even though we might be 65 or later on in life we had a corded phone, right? And now everybody uses the iPhone. We're going to keep evolving. And even in retirement, we have that mindset of continuing to learn.
keep the mind active and your body will hopefully follow. So it's the people that sit and do nothing that it tends to seem like their quality of life seems to go downhill. And so again, it's keep your
Yeah.
mind sharp.
Yeah, and health and wellness is a really big focus too as retirement approaches. So for the people that want to learn more about like working with you or connecting with you, can you tell them the best way to find you?
Sure. I have a website, pointwealthmanagement.com. I'm on the social media, so I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then you know, again, obviously there's phone numbers and stuff like that too, but uh the easiest way is go to my website and just, go to my contact form.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your perspective. I love the conversation and the highlights as far as to be prepared to ask the questions, to bring your spouse in. Those are all really, really great points that sometimes people don't think about. And then if you're going to make a major purchase, make sure to involve your financial advisor. So it's also like about creating the life that you want. If this podcast gave you something to think about, share it with somebody who's preparing for retirement or already is in retirement and saying like, now what? But until next time, remember, retirement isn't the end of your purpose. It's an opportunity to renew it. So see you on the next episode.